Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with Hegel's ideas and all, so that helps to clarify a little bit. I'm just, I guess, where we hang up a little bit, because I haven't really delved into much of this work, but I've known a little bit about it for a while, is this idea that, I mean, I understand Hegel's system of thesis to synthesis to try to sort of progress ideas and thoughts, but I'm unclear exactly as to how that would play out practically in certain ways, or for certain ideas.
Well, Crowley talks about that a little bit in Magic Without Tears. I mean, he's definitely very clear that there's a limit to what you should do. I mean, there's a point in the system where, you know, if you want to overcome the attractions and repulsions of your being, you're going to have to try to be repulsed by the things that you're attracted to and be attracted to the things you're repulsed by. So he says, though, you know, it might be suitable, for example, for someone who, you know, hated a particular mode of life or a particular mode of dress to take that on and do that. But he said if you're repulsed by the idea of crime, it's probably not a good idea to go around picking pockets, because you're going to put yourself in trouble, basically. And so within reason, someone is expected to seek out their fears and seek out their desires and find a way to equilibrate those. And that's a very personal thing. And the final realization of that in someone's life, that's why it doesn't come up to the philosopher's grade after someone's kind of already been able to demonstrate willed concentration, demonstrate enough self-discipline to do the yoga at the Zelda grade, demonstrate the imagination in the neophyte grade, and then you're kind of able to, well, at the practicus grade too, the intellectual thing is important. Like, that's when you start having attainments in pratyahara, or awareness of thought, so you can actually become self-aware, radically self-aware on a level that's not theoretically possible without having practiced these things. And that's when it becomes possible to say, okay, I like this, I'm going to find a way to make myself hate it, and I hate this, I'm going to find a way to make myself like it. Yes, I think that the example Crowley used was it would be right to have a sexual affair with a very old and ugly woman that you were disgusted by, and then find beauty in that, but not to pickpockets, I guess.
Is the idea more not to all of a sudden love things that you hate, but more to figure out why you hate things? Or or fear things?
Yeah, you're not expected, in Thine Tao, Crowley, there's this example that he uses where basically he says, you know, for the woman who would be a loyal wife, I prescribed 6 months as a whore to teach her and equilibrate that, but to go back to her other life. And for a whore, I would teach her 6 months as a dutiful wife to teach her that, and then go back to her life. It's not about necessarily reorganizing your entire thing. Although I will say from experience, it does get to a level where it gets confusing, because you oppose something, and then now you've established a new normality, and you have to oppose that in a different way. Now you've established a new normality, but that's the synthesis happening. So it's not the old thing that you come to oppose the second time around, but a sort of new conception of it in light of the other thing. So that's how it progresses. Does that make sense? Am I talking somewhat reasonably?
I have a bit of an extended word that kind of ties into what you're saying. The idea that kind of comes to mind is the notion of ethics, right? So we all sort of behave in some ways that, I guess, you know, we choose to, or we accord our action to certain sort of ideals, and so it's to sort of embrace this a form of anti-morality. I can see that as being, like you're saying, you don't want to steal because they can get you in trouble. There's a bunch of other things that we could do that would be, you know, perhaps completely unethical to how we look at the world or how we want to engage with the world. So, I mean, in those kinds of cases, when you're talking about you know, practical ethics, is it enough simply to just sort of acquire an intellectual grasp of what, the permissiveness of the anti-morality, or
Crowley sees these attainments as leading one to a fully amoral state, something that's really described in the Book of the Law pretty well, especially in Chapter 3. It is essentially one has to overcome what's installed as one's morality. I mean, and this is where Crowley has a relationship with Nietzsche. He called Nietzsche a prophet, even.
Right.
So basically, it's about, yeah, in a sense, you want to transcend your morality. You want to transcend what's been installed in you and figure out what's really you. That's why this happens before the HGA experience, because someone can't come to a knowledge of their true will until they kind of deprogram themselves a little bit. And in a sense, that is a deprogramming phase. But the final result, I would say, is an essentially amoral state, but where one acts on principles that one has learned from these experiences, which will tend to be practical principles, I think. mean, how can I put it? It's just like, for example, someone might be the most completely amoral psychopathic person in the world, but it's very reasonable just to realize that your life goes more smoothly if you're polite. Like, just for that simple purpose, for example.
Yeah, things just work the way they do. Like,
yeah.
Whether the rules are there or not,
yeah.
You will behave that way because, fair enough.
And I think that has to do with when Crowley's talking about this in, I don't remember what this example is even coming from, but he compares it to, and he compares going through life from the perspective of a master of the temple as playing a game of chess. You will play a game, and you are separate and above it, and you can move the pieces, different pieces in different ways, but the game still proceeds according to set rules, and you can't violate those rules because they are within the confines of the game. And even if you're above the abyss, and you can see the game as a game for what it is, you still have to follow the rules when you move your pieces.
What would you recommend as for somebody who's pretty much like a newbie, and they want to pursue it a little bit further? Would you recommend doing a lot of the reading first and that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I'd say start with the AA reading list, basically.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty much the most obvious place to start. So, 1 star in sight is the...
1 star in the site, yeah, except, well, the reading list isn't always attached to that. But it's easy if, actually, there's a site called ordoaa.org, which lays it all out, lays the whole out of college out in terms of the grades, so it's really easy to just click on, okay, this is what I need to know for this grade, and this is what I need to know for that grade.
And if you were to initiate with that order, do they charge money?
I actually don't know. I just use their website when I can't, when I'm too lazy to look at my bookshelf, really. No idea. I know that there's a couple of people fighting over lineage about this right now, but I mean, I don't really see how that someone could come away from reading what Crowley said about it and think that that's tremendously important. I mean, I think that it has a certain significance, sure, but I'm not sure that it certainly doesn't legitimize the entire order or teaching order. And some of these AAs too go back into group work and socialization. So if you see that, that's kind of a warning sign. Crowley actually said that ideally, a member of the order would have no social contact with another member other than the one who initiates them and the one that they initiate, and that's it. Yeah, especially like later on in his life, he got really suspicious of group work or occult organizations where people met in large groups and tried to accomplish magical or mystical tasks.
Then, sorry, but it's like, he's also always talking about like promulgation of the law. Mm-hmm. So if he's suspicious of groups that would teach something, and then it's like, how does he expect to do that?
Well, because basically in the Liberal, it basically says, like with each man or woman to dine or to drink, it is the law to give. So you make it available, and what he saw was just Thelemites would make that available, and that would be it. Now, mind you, earlier in his career, he was really focused on the OTO, which did a lot of group work. And like later on, he decided that that was a terrible idea, basically. So he changed his perspective very much. Promulgation of the law should be nothing more than making it available. Just because it specifically says in the book, argue not, convert not. Don't talk about this. Don't try to give other people your interpretation of this. Let them interpret it for themselves, basically. And the ideal would be that Thelema would spread by that means. And the crowd of people trying to promulgate the law right now through various, very silly, very facile means is kind of sad, but that's immediately obvious to most people, I think.
I've always very much seen it that way too. That it's really about just getting the word out there and letting people make the decision for themselves. It's not about trying to convince people to see it a certain way, or at least it shouldn't be. And that's the danger with group activities.
Yeah.
Is people will try to get you to see it their way or try to do things their way. I think that's why Crowley maybe shied away from it.
Well, yeah, and I would argue even that there's a natural dynamic that emerges under any group of human people. Like once you get beyond 2 or 3 people, then attention can only be focused in one place at one time. Power relationships are going to happen between different people. There's going to be like this social drama, and that will quickly overshadow whatever the individual work is. But it's interesting how you can kind of like start to identify